There we go.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the panel, Own It or Outsource It, a discussion for life science CEOs, CFOs, and boards, hosted by CLA. Today's panel is being recorded, so a replay will be available in the next day or two on BioCT's site in our virtual library. Please know that you are being muted at the moment and video is off, and we ask as a courtesy for our panelists and our moderator that you remain in mute mode until we get to the Q&A portion of today's discussion. Thank you all, and Chess, I'm going to hand it to you.
Okay, hey, great, Kelly. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to share slide, share screen. And just make sure everyone can see that. Can you all see that okay? Bicycle, title slide, outsource. Okay, great. Thanks for coming. You know, the theme, oh, here's, excuse me just a second. I think I'm hearing something from Ulrich, our other speaker. Okay, just needs a minute, but he'll join. So again, thanks for joining. You know, the big question is own it or outsource it. You know, discussion amongst life science CEOs, CFOs, and boards, you know, presented by BioCT, sponsored by Clifton Larson Allen. We begin each of our presentations with a disclaimer, given the nature of our business being financial, wealth advisory, some pretty confidential stuff. Plus, we want to make sure that what we discuss here isn't a recommendation, you must do this, you must not do that, but really just an open discussion that we can have together. So thank you for that. So simple agenda. I'm going to kick it off with a quick overview, brief introductions, a little theme that I've carried in my head. Assembling a business is not rocket science. And then right into the panel discussion where we'll spend the bulk of today. And then Q&A, if you have questions, you know, type them into the chat. Let me get Ulrich in here, and then we'll go through that towards the end. So very quickly, you know, the themes, and this was in the invitation, you know, what we hope to cover today in the Own It or Outsource It, basic themes, you know, while launching and scaling a new business, executives, CEOs, CFOs, boards really need to decide what functions they should keep in-house and what they can outsource. And again, starting it from that perspective, then I'd say everything's up for grabs. Legal, finance, accounting, HR, IT, you know, the general administrative stuff, the back office of keeping the gears working, but also the research, clinical research, even CEOs, interim CEO roles, almost every function is what I call up for grabs. And then we're going to have a panel discussion to discuss the why, what, and when to own it or outsource it. And we have an assembly of panelists that are hands-on experience, you know, from the CEO, CFO, and service provider, you know, perspective, which would be CLA. But again, the CLA folks on the call here on the panel have hands-on operating experience. So hopefully we'll create a very balanced view. Today's panelists, theme I'd like to play is experience matters. Ulrich just joined. Ulrich Thienel is CEO of ReAlta Life Sciences, also former Chief Medical Officer. Oh yeah, Ulrich is on, good. Of Finch Therapeutics up here in the Boston area. Scott Phillips, who's on also, he's based in Connecticut. He has the enviable role of being CFO of two companies, Halda Therapeutics and Normunity. Mike Lacrosse, other panelists, he's with CLA. He's the principal in charge of business operations, which is the outsourcing group at CLA. But he also, as I mentioned, comes with industry experience. You know, was former CFO of Industry Physics, and I didn't have room on this, but he was prior senior director of finance at iRobot, you know, one of those name brand companies. Myself, I head up life sciences for CLA. Before CLA, I was starting a biotech company called GRoot Biomedical Services, and I did digital health and stuff like that before. So that's the backdrop. We'll get more into the panelist introductions as we move forward. Just a little bit of the crass commercial self-promotion. CLA, we do a lot of stuff. We are very industry focused. We have wealth advisory, outsourcing, audit, and tax. And we provide a lot of services under that umbrella. The life sciences practice, it's emerging, it's growing, as you might expect. Across the nation, we have over 800 corporate clients. This was late last year, so I think we're probably closer to 900 at this point. And in terms of mix, it's pretty broad categories: 40% biopharma, 36%, digital health, med devices, which I think of that as being more of the engineering aspects, and then with 24% lab instruments and services, and a pretty even mix, 50-50, 48% what I would call a traditional CPA accounting firm, tax and assurance and audit, and 52% is actually our outsourcing, consulting, and wealth advisory business. So enough about that. Just to play out, it's mentioned to Kelly, this is a slide of really the context of why we're in life sciences, and it's all about the people. The numbers are stark. COVID mortality as of actually the numbers were yesterday, 6.286 million. Diabetes mortality rate on an annualized basis, 3.8 million. 9.6 million cancer deaths per year. This is across the world. And then in the US itself, 150 million roughly in the US chronic condition of one sort of another, adult and younger folks. CLA, big theme, plain and simple. We help life sciences companies improve capital efficiency and reduce risks, which is all about what we do in terms of our business and the umbrella. But basically, so companies like Ulrich and Scott's can focus on keeping people alive and well, plain and simple. Okay, I'm going to touch a little bit about assembling a business isn't rocket science. I'm going to take one little case example from my past. This was for a digital health company. We invented a digital health app to change the way America eats. A smartphone app and an online app. And we literally went from a PowerPoint slide deck to first revenue in 8 weeks. As you can imagine, it was a scurry, a scramble to get this all done. When we were assembling the company, one of our teammates said, "Hey, why is this so hard? This isn't rocket science." And folks who know me know that, in fact, I am a trained rocket scientist. Worked on a satellite on the left, that was out in Hughes Aircraft Company, and we actually designed it for shuttle launch. So yeah, this assembling a business is not rocket scientist. If it were rocket science, it would be a lot easier. So to represent that, I grabbed a screenshot of my desktop from Starting Good Measures, file folders, subfolders and whatnot, but everything in there, all the way from board minutes, private placement memorandums, 409A, stock option evaluation, product design, IP filing, employee agreements, coffee receipts, it's all in there. Every single part is kind of part of that business. Like in an airplane, yeah, some things are not as risky, like a tray table that doesn't stay up. But if you have an engine go down, that's a whole different story in terms of risk. So that's the backdrop, the context, just for teeing up the discussion today. Thanks for indulging me. Okay, so we're going to launch into the panel discussion. We'll introduce our panelists, have them introduce themselves, and then go through a series of hopefully thought-provoking questions. And so just to set the context, this is exactly what we're going to talk about. Introduction from each panelist. Think about, second, what functions did you keep in-house or outsourced during your early days? What functions, for the functions you chose, was it primarily for capital efficiency or risk reduction? And the fourth being, what are the functions you plan on keeping in-house or going outside as you look forward into the future? So at this point, as I'm going to cycle through the different panelists, and each question I'm going to start with Ulrich, put you on the spot, then Scott, and then Mike. Sound good? And I'll keep those questions up so folks can keep track of where we are. I can keep track. And we'll spend about maybe 10 minutes or so on each question, divided amongst the three. Ulrich, this is your chance to talk about yourself and brag about your company.
Maybe if I go off mute, you can actually hear me. Yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Chaz. Very happy to be part of this. Let me say we had a great Memorial Day weekend, so it's nice to come back to work, after doing nothing over the weekend. So what's ReAlta Life Sciences, or who am I? I'm a physician scientist by background, trained in Germany. Then, as you introduced, moved to Columbia University, New York to do my rheumatology fellowship. So I'm a legal alien for many, many years before I became an American dual citizen, American German citizen. I was fortunate enough here to really benefit from the educational system, training system, capital system in the United States. Went into industry, first large pharma, then small biotech company, as you said. Finch was the last one in Boston, before I became CEO of ReAlta Life Sciences. ReAlta Life Sciences is a small phase 2 clinical stage company focusing on rare diseases. It's based in Norfolk, Virginia, which is, correct, it is not the Bay Area and it's not the Boston area. So that brings challenges and opportunities that I believe are relevant for what we're talking about today. We're a company of 20 full-time employees, and I would say 40 full-time employee outsourced positions. So we are 1 to 3, 1 in-house and 2 consultant folks. That's the introduction.
Thank you. You want to say just a couple words of what you're actually working on? And
yeah, sure. So
ReAlta
Life Sciences has a platform of compounds that are peptides that are derived from a virus. Viruses, as we all know by now, causes really bad diseases and everything. There's pain, suffering, long thing. And the virus our founder came about, causes diarrhea, but no symptoms. And so the question was then, what's going on here? And we identified this like a natural derived compound that is rebalancing the immune system. So we believe it can transform the way we think about acute inflammatory processes, things like COVID-19, pulmonary diseases. And we're working as a lead indication that is now in phase 2 with birth asphyxia. Birth asphyxia is where babies are born, complete normal gestation, and then have a stroke-like syndrome. And that is associated with hypoxia in the brain, but then due to the stroke-like syndrome, massive amounts of inflammation. We give this therapy. And this is the lead compound, and we're now going for severe asthma. Again, when you have asthma, you have a massive inflammation in the lungs, and this is where the therapy works. And very, very proud of this development and great safety profile, and that's why we're moving forward for phase 2.
Great.
In order to support all this, I think what is the work impact? In order to support all this, we need to have over time a shifting amount of folks working with us. So our founders are the originators, and we have a C-suite. And then we need folks that understand the manufacturing of the compounds. This compounds, then there needs to be quality because, of course, as we all know, correct, FDA is a tightly regulated environment. We need folks that conduct the preclinical studies, animal models. We need then people to work with that submit to regulatory authorities.
Got it.
FDA is the first one, but there are other ones in Europe. We just made a press release about BfArM, which is the German regulatory authorities, where we filed a study, our second study. And then we need people to operate this. And along the line, like what CLA is doing, we need folks to manage all the incoming and outgoing, at this point in time, a lot of outgoing money.
Cool.
So,
Ulrich, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm going to. Apologies. I think you're actually getting into the second and third question. Perfect. So my apologies for cutting you off. But Scott, you want to give an intro of what you do, what your work is, and all that sort of stuff?
Sure, happy to, Ches. And hope everyone had a nice Memorial Day weekend, and welcome back. So yeah, my background, so I'm unlike Ulrich, my background is on the finance side. So I sort of handle a lot of the financial and G&A activities. I spent most of my biotech career with Alexion Pharmaceuticals. I started there when we were about 250 people. By the time I left, we were about 3,000. So pre-revenue to about $4 billion a year. And saw sort of the evolution of the business as we grew from many outsourced functions to many functions, including manufacturing and clinical and regulatory and commercial, that we brought in-house by the end of my time there. I left Alexion and I went to progressively smaller companies. So I was with a a small public biotech, and then more recently, as Ches mentioned, I'm CFO for two companies, Halda Therapeutics and Normunity, both preclinical. One is a Series A, one is a Series B. So the topic of what to outsource as a one-person sort of G&A function is near and dear to my heart. I always say my role is really not just the financials, it's really everything that's needed to allow the scientists and the business folks to focus on the science and to focus on the business. And I can handle a lot of the back office. The only way I can do that is with my partners on the outsourcing side.
Great. Thanks, Scott. I'm going to turn it over to Mike for a few sound bites about yourself.
Good morning, I guess good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Lacrosse. I'm currently a principal here at CLA. I lead a portion of our outsourcing practice focused on for-profit businesses here in the Northeast. So my team is essentially the ones that would do some of the outsourcing for companies like yourselves. But my background, so I've been doing this for about 3 years. So before I went to the dark side and became a consultant, I was actually sitting in the shoes very similar to Scott. In my past, I was a CFO of a company called Industrial Physics. It's a private equity-backed manufacturing company that was focusing on building manufacturing equipment for the food, beverage, and packaging industries. But my responsibility was essentially for all administrative functions. And the one thing that I used to say is that if I'm responsible for IT and legal and HR and all of those things, I better have some good partners to help me out, because that's not my background. My background is primarily finance and accounting. Prior to Industrial Physics, I was at iRobot, where I led their defense business for a period of time and their commercial business for a period of time. What you may or may not know about iRobot is they actually outsource their manufacturing to contract manufacturers. So that's some of the stuff that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike. So now we'll go back to the meat of the discussion, and we're going to turn it back to Ulrich, Scott, and then Mike again. And, really plain and simple, what functions did you keep in-house or outsource? Why? And I think importantly for us is to understand the decision process that goes through your head as CEO, CFO, as you're doing this. Who gets involved in that decision, that type of thing. Ulrich, you want to take it back?
I focus on the first bullet. So what we kept in-house is that is essential, and that is really, even in a hybrid model, not functional to outsource, where you just need to have clear reliability. This is, in our case, most of the C-suite, so our chief scientific officer and chief medical officer, who are both founders. There's just knowledge and expertise that they have that we need to keep as an organization. The other thing is what we kept in-house is chief financial officer. As you heard initially, through the complexity that you have in the biotech space, chief financial officer is not only the head of finance, but HR and IT. And we have to have somebody who owns that space. And beneath, we can outsource below. If we need additional resources, yes, you can. So the lead functions have to be in-house. The other aspect that we kept in-house is program leadership. That's a situation that evolves over time. Initially, that was outsourced. But once a program, we talked about the babies and the other programs, gets to a certain stage where there's a significant complexity, that person, from my perspective, remains in-house, because that person ultimately becomes the CEO of the small compound. And that's where we have the leadership positions in-house. The only other thing that we have not outsourced is our lab. We're doing our preclinical studies, so our animal work ourselves, at least to some degree. And so the science that we originate is in-house, and we kept that in-house. So that's the other part that we keep in-house.
Got it. I'm going to make a broad assumption that you've outsourced your legal support. intellectual
And that goes to
property.
the second bullet.
Oh, sorry, never mind. Oops, I broke my own rule. Ah,
third bullet,
busted. Okay, Scott, over to you. Thanks, Ulrich.
Sure. Yeah. So it's a very similar story here. And I was sort of, preparing for this, I was sort of thinking about what are the rules that I think about when I'm thinking about outsourcing or bringing things in-house. I don't think any of these are written down, but I think a couple things that came to mind. One, and it could be any combination of these. One, obviously, a function where there's a full FTE required, right? So we, as a startup organization, you're progressing the science. You may be in a position where you might be starting tox studies, or you might be getting ready to think about your clinical study design. So there could be areas where it's a required resource, but there's just not enough work for a full-time head. So that's sort of one is just level of efforts. Second, I think Ulrich touched on this, is sort of things that are core and fundamental to what we do. They're more apt to be areas where we would bring in-house. So for us, for example, at Halda, we do all of our lab work, all of our biological lab work is done in-house. All of the chemistry work is done with a third-party CRO. So we've sort of, we do all the chemical designs, hand it off to CRO, they bring it back. And then I think the third area is sort of that we look at is it a high risk area or low risk area? So there's areas that are more high risk, they're more likely to bring in-house for us. So all that being said, what we've decided for Halda and Normunity both is really any of the G&A we have outsourced. So legal, IT, HR, accounting, tax. I'm the single point of contact for all of that. Again, making the lives easier for the scientists, but really finding partners that can handle all those, and importantly, finding really good partners, people that are engaged in the business, know what we're doing, know what our goals are. It's not a transactional relationship. It's very much having them embedded into the team. And then on the scientific side, it really just depends on the sort of criteria that I laid out. And it depends on the stage of the science. Is it something that's core? Is it something that is really important? Do you need that expertise? Is that expertise hard to find? In some cases, there might be areas on the scientific side where you'd like to have someone in-house. It's just hard to find that resource. So you have to work with a partner. So it really sort of depends on kind of the stage of the organization in terms of what we bring in-house versus outsource on the scientific side.
Gotcha. Scott, if I can ask a question on the science side, and you can say, don't ask me that, I can't answer it. But I'm curious, you outsource the CRO for your chemistry work or chemical work. How come chemistry and not biology? Or is it just fundamentally how your product or your research is structured, or why?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty typical now for small molecule companies in particular to outsource the chemistry. Yeah. And the rationale for that, I think, is twofold. One is the expertise you can get from a third party is very good. We use a third party based in China that does great work. There's third parties in Eastern Europe, India. There's third parties in North America as well. And then secondly, from a cost perspective, you're able to scale up and scale down very, very quickly on the chemistry side. But again, like I said, the sort of the really core fundamental kind of, call it brain work, is done in-house. The design of the compounds is done by the team based in Connecticut who are really at the pulse of what we're trying to do. And then really it's the synthesis part that's outsourced.
Gotcha. Okay, cool, thanks. Mike, I'm going to call on you, particularly because you have dual role kind of experience, operating hands-on, and then from the outsourcing leadership side. If you can reflect on that, even the clients you work with, why they outsource it, why they don't choose to go with us or change and transition. It's a broad, set of questions that maybe you can help us with.
Sure. So, I think Scott and Ulrich said it exactly, is, the companies that I'm primarily working with are ones that are really focused on delivering or building a widget. Maybe that's their specialty, or servicing a client, or doing the science. That's their core. And that's what we keep telling people, is do what you're really good at and let someone else do what they're really good at. Kind of going back to what I said a few minutes ago, and Scott's in a similar boat. If I'm responsible for all G&A, I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to be the one who's going to be really good at fixing your computer. If your computer breaks, you're going to want to have some sort of outsourced function that's really good at doing those things that you're not good at. So, for my background, what I did was I outsourced HR, payroll, tax, legal, and IT in my last company. But we were in the process of doing various different things. We came from a little bit of a different background because we were backed by private equity. One of our strategies was essentially to acquire businesses. We acquired about a dozen businesses in about I think it's a 3 or 4 year period. And what we found is that every business had a different skill set. Every business had somebody else doing a little bit of a different function, could have people doing 5 different functions all in one. And what we tried to do is use this to build best practices across the company, put in standard processes, standard procedures, and get to a set of financials, obviously, that were all reported in a similar fashion. So we used it not only for focusing on what you're good at and what you're not good at, but we also focus on bringing best practices in. And we see that a lot of clients are doing that today, that they realize that things just aren't running as smooth or efficiently as they should, and maybe they need additional expertise. So we see kind of that on the CLA side as well.
Gotcha. I'm going to jump in, but switch roles. Just from personal experience, having started up a couple companies. One reason for me personally to outsource is I got tired of staying up late at night, just taking care of that stuff. The other, as we were raising money, also dealing with our own board, quite simply, I didn't want to look dumb. Trying to self-administer, something goes wrong, feeling like I didn't do everything I could have. So that was more of a personal experience, keep myself out of trouble kind of stuff. Okay, how about if we move to the third question, which is, for the functions you choose to outsource, what's the primary driver, that brought you to that decision? Was it capital efficiency, measured in time, money, people, resources, or risk reduction? Ulrich, you want to take that one on?
Yeah, so you heard already from Scott and Mike a little bit about this, and it's the same situation for us. Capital efficiency is clearly one aspect. And the way to be more specific about it, we look at hiring a person between 3 and 6 months. We are so far quite successful that we say three months is usually when we get a new person in. If I don't need a full-time resource in the next 12 to 18 months, I'm going to stay away from it. So I really look at this. There's always fluctuations. Drug development is a high-risk business. Correct? Remember, you have just 1 out of 10 compounds that is filed for an IND only makes it to a market. So things go wrong, things are getting delayed. So my time frame is, if I know that I need somebody in 12 to 18 months, that's basically how I gauge it. If I have before, then I would not even look for full-time FTEs. Just one thing. The other aspect is the capability set. There are certain aspects that I get on the market, specifically on a partial FTE, that I just can't find. And here's Norfolk, Virginia, certainly another area, correct? COVID made it easier, but clearly if I would have been looking for a full-time person to bring to Norfolk, Virginia, best place on earth, quality of life to live. But then again, correct, ain't Boston there. If you lose a job, in biopharma, and you want to go back, you're gonna have to move somewhere else. So that is an aspect of availability and talent pool that comes to mind. And I've learned, or we've learned, that that there are certain jobs where you ramp up, correct? It goes a little bit into the fourth one, but where you ramp up and you just don't need it right now. Case in point with CLA, our CFO got too busy and was coming to a limit, and we brought in folks and resources to support him so that he can ultimately function at a better level. It's another reason. When you see that the full-time FTEs get stretched to thin, support them with folks that can grow. And, you know, if you come to a point, again, as I said, 12 months down the line, you can bring people in. The business development activities, we're going forward, it comes in waves. We looked at this, we wanted to outsource our compound non-US, so we keep the US role. That was a targeted approach. What I'm going to do 6 months after the business development, if it's successful, well, fine, but if it's not successful, what are we going to do with a business development person? Again, that was brought in from the outside. What I've learned is when you think about outsourcing, you need to think about the quality that is out there. And it takes sometimes more time to find a outsourcing company of quality than an outsourced person. So when we look at people, I mean, finance CLA, very happy with you folks. And then when we think about CMC, we went through 3 different vendors to find the vendor, the CRO that provided us with the folks that we think are good. So that is an aspect that might be overlooked, that when you outsource, it's not only the people that you outsource and you want to have bring in, but it's the companies that bring you the peoples. And there are massive differences there.
Got it. Scott, you want to talk about this one?
Sure, yeah, and I want to echo Ulrich's comment also on just the quality of the outsource firm. You know, in some ways, people think, well, if you just hand it off to someone, you can get sort of anyone that's been in the business. But you know, I've found there's areas where I found just phenomenal partners that are able to grow with us. And then there's areas where I've just struck out. Even to this day, I'm still trying to find a good partner for this function. And so, you know, the more you're able to network with people in your industry, you know, get references from people that you know and trust is really important to find that really good partner. It just makes your life just so much easier. In terms of just the question at hand here, I think in the early days, it's really a capital efficiency play, as we've seen here in biotech in the last 6 months, with values being cut 50–60% or more. Just preparing for a downturn is a lot easier when you have an outsourced function rather than having folks in-house. When you have to cut you know, employees, and I'm sure many folks have been through this, it's really just painful, and you really don't want to go through that. And just with respect to biotech, there's ups and downs along the way, and you're sort of beholden to the markets and sort of where they are. So typically capital efficiency, I think from a risk perspective, there's probably certain areas where we'd outsource from a risk perspective. So an example would be like IP counsel, right? We find the best IP counsel, you pay for it. They're very expensive, but to bring in someone full-time, even for something that's super critical to the company, is really difficult, and it's difficult to find those resources. So, you know, absent that, I find that over time, as risk grows, that it's better to have sort of a dedicated person in-house that's really focused on issues 40+ hours a week, as opposed to someone who's only there part of the time. So I think as you grow, I think the risk piece becomes more and more important.
Gotcha. Thanks. Mike, you're next.
Yeah, you know, I think it is all the above on this list is kind of what I've seen. It is certainly the capital efficiencies, as the time, money, people, it's the risk reduction. I think the other thing that people don't necessarily think about, and we see this a lot with our clients today, if you're a $5 or $10 million business, you may hire a CFO, a controller, a bookkeeper, whatever title that you may want, but is that really the right person that you need to do all of the different aspects? So what we found is the outsourcing function, you can have a portion of each of these people. You can have a portion of a accounts payable person, a portion of a controller, and a portion of a CFO that can help you in all those different aspects. And you know, that's really about efficiency as well. You know, if you hired a full-time controller to sit on your staff, they probably don't have the skill set of that CFO, and they probably don't want to be processing the accounts payable every single week. So you think about it, you're putting the right people in the right places, and you really drive more efficiencies in that process as well.
Yeah. Actually, if I can jump in also out of role, I was CEO of an outsourcing company that served the biotech company, very specialized lab safety officers, regulatory filings, compliance, safety training. And what we found is that, especially in the startup world, having fractional people was the right way to go. But as a company, we pulled those people together as professionals. So even if you're spending like half a day here, half a day there was actually some professional development, some sharing experience, for the professional staff, but also for the clients to tap into that expertise. For example, what's it take to set up a lab in Watertown? Well, we have people who've done that before. A solo practitioner is a little tougher for. Okay. The fourth question, then we can probably go open-ended and more organic in our conversation. But the last question in the discussion guide is really about the future. What do you plan on bringing in-house? How do you decide it? What are you going to keep outside? If you can dial it forward like 12, 18 months, it's hard to think about 2 years or 3 years, but Ulrich, I'm sure you've thought about this one a lot.
And so, as I indicated, we have a list of folks that we hire for this year, that we hire for next year, and then we adjust in who we need. So we had, for example, initially planned to bring in T-36 the commercial folks, correct? But now that we are seeing some slowing down and where we're going, and FDA wants a different clinical regulatory path, and we can move this out by 12 months. So we have a clear list of folks that we want to bring in based upon the needs, be it in clinical development, manufacturing, commercial or otherwise, and we adjust to that end. And this is, of course, dependent on success. Let me walk you through. So when we have now a phase 2 program, and we're going to have a second phase 2 program coming online, and another one, a third program coming in that is going to phase 1. For that, we require to have more manufacturing oversight. Manufacturing will remain because it's a capability that we cannot bring in for peptides, remain outsourced. But we need to bring a quality person and a manufacturing person house. It costs us a lot of money, but it is well served right now. But as we grow and further, that's a person we need to bring in. So clearly driven by growth as well as specification and quality what we need. Secondly, as indicated, we are thinking IPO, right? So who of the folks that we have right now outsourced would ultimately then be required to come in-house, because through the growth, we need more capability there. And third, in the commercial space, as we think about that, we need to build this out. So it's, and legal is one of them as well. We have great legal advisors because we need folks for IP, we need folks for general counsel, and then we need folks for the transactions, be BD or fundraising efforts. So from my perspective, I've seen models where people brought in lawyers before. I still have this one way out there because I still believe that the 3 different types of lawyers we need are better outsourced than insourced. But that's how I look at this. It's a growth opportunity mostly in an area where in-house capability is required, because that is something we're more confident in. Same situation with the C-suite, more confident in than relying on an outsourced person.
Gotcha. Ulrich, it's interesting you touched on legal, because I'm maybe not the same 3, but the way we layered it is, big heavy lifting corporate stuff, definitely need an expert. IP for sure, an outside expert. But once it got to be contractual, hopefully you'll get there too, just chugging out a lot of agreements, then that was more of an in-house function, but still CFO playing traffic cop, if you will. Yeah. Scott, over to you. Future plans?
Sure, yeah. And I always joke, we build a plan at the beginning of the year, and only one, there's only one outcome, and that's the plan will be wrong, right? So you're hopefully on the upside, but so yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, Ulrich mentioned the IPO path. That's probably the one area where sort of the CFO handling everything, I think, falls apart a little bit, just because there's so much requirements for compliance, investor focus, analyst focus, and so forth. So, I do think as companies are preparing to go public within, let's say, 9 to 12 months, they really have to get some folks in-house. SEC reporting is important. You can outsource that, and I've had experience outsourcing the SEC reporting. It gets very expensive. And like I said, the folks aren't as integrated into the business, so it just makes it a little more complicated. Same with legal. I think as you're preparing for IPO, I think starting to think about having some in-house legal probably makes some sense. On the HR side, so one of my companies is 25 people. The other company is 7 people. I think we're probably pretty far away from bringing in an HR head, but I think at some point you get to, let's say, 40, 50 people, you're managing performance, you're managing benefits, it just becomes a lot. Employees have questions, policies, and those sorts of things. I think once you get to sort of 40, 50 plus people, then it probably makes sense to have some sort of dedicated HR, whether that's an in-house or outsourced, but have a more dedicated function there. And then really for us on the scientific side, it's all a matter of progress. So we have a plan in place. Right now, for Normunity as an example, we have a really nice model where head of manufacturing and non-clinical has a whole network of consultants for all the different aspects. I mean, it's amazing that the network he's sort of brought in and the talent to sort of stand things up almost on demand. It's been great, but then over time, as the business becomes more complicated, as we start manufacturing the antibodies, we start tox studies, I think that will change where we start to bring a lot more of that in-house, and then ultimately clinical. I think once our first patient date was within, let's say, 12 months, I think we'd be looking for some full-time clinical folks.
Got it. Cool. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you. Same kind of question. You have the perspective of working with your clients, our clients, but also from your own startup experience.
Yeah, I think from my own experience, there's certain piece of the job that I would have never brought in-house until you get to really large scale. And I think that's kind of where Scott was going too. How many employees do you need before you hire your first HR person? How many employees do you need before you hire your first IT person, your first contract and a legal person? And it's different across every industry. It's different across, the different skill sets that each of these companies have. I look at it and say, if you really want to focus on driving value, start off with that CFO level. And if we're just talking finance and accounting for a minute, keep that CFO in-house. And then when do you bring a controller in place? Well, is it you're starting to spend so much on the outsourcing component that you need a controller there 3 to 4 days a week now? Well, at that point, it's a cost play, right? You're going to start to actually save money by bringing it in-house, and you get more value because that person would be there for an extra day. So depending on the company situation, that's kind of how we look at it with our clients is, does it make sense to bring in? And then do you want that additional responsibility? If you're focused on going out and IPOing or buying a business or doing something like that, does it make sense to have it in-house so you have that person right by your side? Or does it make more sense to have it outsourced where you don't have to worry about all that stuff is taken care of for you? You need to focus on driving the real value to the organization. So it's really different across all the different functions and all these different sizes and skill sets of the companies.
Gotcha. Really helpful. So we've kind of gone through the whole list, and I think we can open it up either to questions or questions from the panel. What are we not asking? If you're sitting on something between Ulrich, Scott, and Mike that you want to share, or are we kicking over to the audience to ask some questions? Sounds like we're okay. Let's see I don't see any questions really posted in the chat yet. Oh, if we can think about, or you put your questions in the chat, that'd be great.
I just want to highlight again from my perspective while we're waiting for some questions.
Yeah.
outsourcing is something that is neither good nor bad. I think it's what you make of it, and and you learn along the line. So you get enough folks you work with, and
Ulrich, you're
don't
breaking
work
up.
out.
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit. Apologies.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, I'm just going to go on stop video. That sometimes works better.
Gotcha.
So it's do you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So outsourcing is neither good nor bad. I find that it's you have to make the same crucial decision as you when you bring people in. And ideally, when you bring somebody in, you don't want to sit in a position like Moderna, who has to fire somebody within a day, correct? That was just brutal, brutal, brutal. And on the other hand, you may find yourself with an outsourced model as well that it's not a match. And you have to do the same reference and the same background on folks, maybe not as intense, but you should, because otherwise you find yourself 3 months down that they're not working out. And Scott says he had somebody who has a huge network, and this is what we're looking for as well. We're working with an outsourced group for 6 years now, and we will stick with them. And then there's some people who come in and out and are not staying with us. They're staying out for a project. But I think outsourcing, think about it as not the background check and the work you're spending in this, at least at the beginning, to find somebody, just work with them for years. You need to be very thoughtful about that.
That's a good point. Listening to the discussion earlier, it's a lot of times it just comes down to the person you get or the people you get. They've been managed in one company or not, but it's really that personal trust, that intimacy you can create with someone who feels like a team member, not an outsider. I think that's one of the keys I've always looked for. And that might be the biggest downside risk, is the right person.
Well, and to that point, Joe, I like to point out something else is people don't necessarily think about turnover too much. Well, in the environment that we live in today, if there's a lot of turnover in the world, there's a lot of people going to new roles, and if you have an accountant on your team that gave 2 weeks notice, you've got 2 weeks to transition to someone else. Do you have someone that you could get to take on that much work that quickly? In the outsourcing world, guess what? We have turnover too. People will leave and go for other companies, other industries, all that type of stuff. But it's our role as the outsourcer to basically backfill that person right away for the client. So you may think about it as someone has left is going to leave your company. They give them their 2 weeks notice. It probably takes you 2 to 3 months to hire somebody. We, as the outsourcing company, we will have someone in there supporting you right away and help transition to someone else if someone leaves on our staff. So there really is no turnover. It's a seamless outsourcing approach where your services are still being taken care of. That's one big advantage you get from dealing with firms like ourselves.
Got it. Questions from the audience? I'm not seeing a lot of traffic on the chat, but that's okay.
I think, one other area, just thinking about, is just areas where I've had success outsourcing and where I haven't. And I think a lot of it comes down to the partners and the individual people on the accounts. I think if you can get someone where there's some continuity, just one example I have where I just struck out every time is sort of something as simple as benefits and payroll, and like looking at I've looked at PEO models, I've looked at brokers, I've looked at every model, I've looked at HR consultants. It's like something it's one of those that should be simple and shouldn't take a lot of time, and it ends up taking inordinate amount of time. And I'm sure everybody has different experiences with that. So from that perspective, and it could be because it's not so wholly integrated into the business that you're getting people who kind of dive in and dive out. Whereas my experience on the accounting side, and plug for CLA, the team I have at CLA is really integrated. They really know what we're doing. We have bi-weekly calls. We're going through things constantly, and that seems to work well. So And that's, closing the books and doing our year-end audit, that's much more complicated than standing up, benefits and running payroll. So, go figure why one is more successful than the other.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one. That's interesting.
So I think the other aspect is, when you think about outsourcing, is it about programs or is it about individuals? We talked a lot about individual skill sets, correct? Bringing in here one or other, but then you have to think about the pharma business, about whole programs, and they can be very, very costly. So when we think about outsourcing a program for clinical development, going with a huge company like a PPD, Icon, whatever they're called now, names change every single day, IQVIA. When you outsource, these are mammoth amounts of money and changes are not that fast. So I believe there's a different aspect of outsourcing. Some, you always outsource your study work. But again, are you going to go with a small one or a large one? I think bearing in mind that outsourcing can be very cost intensive, to the point where Scott says, hey, I'm going to bring some clinical operations folks in-house, that is an important question. And secondly, these are multi-year contracts, 2-3-year contracts. So again, you're on the hook for quite a substantial amount of money. So having an RFP that is not talked about, this request for proposal, where you get at least 2 or 3 proposals in there for some of the outsourced work, is very, very crucial for success.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, because I'm just reiterating what you're saying. At that point, the scale is huge and the commitments are large. Got it.
Yeah, many times, I find having someone in-house, it makes it, not just that they can handle the risk and compliance aspects, but they also know where potentially to reduce cost and reduce rework down the line. So in some cases, investing in an in-house person to kind of manage those large relationships. You bring in someone who's part of the team, who has skin in the game. Might be C-suite, but it might not be someone that can handle those large relationships. In the long run, that can really help the team and actually reduce cost.
Got it. I know there's a couple of CLA folks on the call. And if you yourselves have some burning questions, please just dial them in. This is a good opportunity for all of us to learn. Okay, if we're not, it sounds like we're pretty close to it. We've done a Q&A session. So maybe all we can do is say thanks. Appreciate it. Panelists, really appreciate your help here. Hopefully you've already also learned something. I know I learned a lot during the call.
Yeah, thank you very much. Absolutely. It's a pleasure being on this call, on this panel.
Thanks, Ulrich. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks,
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Mike, thank you.